All right, I want to take just a little time to go through the rest of the notes here. We've got quite a bit to cover, and by doing it this way, hopefully you'll be able to go back and rewind if you need to and pause to take notes. Um, but that way we can get through the rest of the notes about the Gilded Age. Please remember yesterday we talked about how the Gilded Age, this term was coined by the famous author Mark Twain, and um, the golden age meant that there was gold on the outside, everything looked great, but on the inside, not so much. And so that was the where we get the idea of the Gilded Age. We looked quickly at the well, I shouldn't say quickly. But you took notes on the positive, negative effects, and so I want to get on down here to where we left off. We left off on the trust and monopoly, and there I want to pick up and go through this, and that way you can finish the rest of your notes. This whole idea of horizontal consolidation or vertical consolidation. When we're talking about monopolies and trusts, you had two different types, those that were vertical and those that were horizontal. Vertical is like what you see here with Carnegie Steel buying the steel mills, the coal mines, the iron mines, ships, railroads, everything Carnegie needed to create the steel. He bought those industries. That's called vertical. Okay. Whereas horizontal is like Vanderbilt. That's where you buy the same type of company and you just consolidate it into one. Vanderbilt didn't like competition, so he bought the other railroads and he made it into one. That way, as it says here, he could control the shipping. So, to help you understand the difference between vertical consolidation, or also known as vertical integration, and horizontal. Vertical is like you see here. In this case, we're talking about uh, the meat industry. Okay, so if you were in the meat industry, you would buy the cattle, you would own it, you would own the slaughterhouses, you would own your refrigerated railroad cars, your warehouses, the meat packing plants, etc., all the way up to having these factories be able to ship it out, etc. That is called vertical. Horizontal is where you own many of the same type of company to create one. In this case, we're talking about oil. Remember yesterday we talked about Standard Oil. Notice he had all, there was no competition. He owned it all, it was one company. So you have vertical versus horizontal. Vertical, where you own all the different parts of the process to create a product. Horizontal is it's the same thing. You're doing the same exact process, except you just buy up all the competition. Okay, and so here we go with your what you probably need to write down is this part right here: horizontal consolidation, buying companies that are in competition with your own, and that's it. That's all you need to write down for horizontal. Vertical is buying the businesses that produce, compile, deliver, or sell the materials needed to make a product. So just write down this part and this part, and that's it. Okay? And then you do have examples. The horizontal, um, you do have the example of Vanderbilt buying up all the railroad companies, whereas the vertical, you have Carnegie, and then you have some where in more modern time, where Google bought Motorola to help build their phones. Um, Microsoft bought Nokia, and etc. Okay, so your differences between horizontal and vertical. And if you still have questions about this, please be sure to talk to me. Let me know. I'll be glad to talk to you about it. So, if you look at this political cartoon, what is a robber baron? Notice this is based on medieval times. Some people call it the Dark Ages, where your few noblemen taxed the poor greatly to where they had nothing. Well, same thing with here. You see all these trusts and monopolies, basically uh, in the form of Rockefeller, Carnegie, etc. And the people here barely basically having to turn back in their taxes and wages, and they get to keep the money. Okay. If you look at robber barons, sometimes they were known as robber barons or captains of industry. Please just write this down here about the wealthy owners and industrialists that had good or bad reputations. Those that had bad reputations were Vanderbilt and Morgan, J.P. Morgan. You're probably familiar with that. J.P. Morgan, of course, was into banking, and today, those of you familiar with Chase, it's Chase J.P. Morgan. Okay, uh, the, the one that had a mixed reputation, sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, was Rockefeller. And those that had positive were Carnegie and, of course, Henry Ford. And if you look at this, get through it here. Um, you don't have to necessarily write this part down, but just know the difference between the robber barons, those that had a negative uh, kind of look or reputation in society, versus captains of industry, those that were positive. Okay, for your robber barons, as it says, it drained the country of natural resources, paid their workers terribly, whereas captains of industry gave money back through charity, helped create new jobs, etc. All right. Uh, we see here Vanderbilt, of course. Those of you, Commodore Vanderbilt, those of you familiar in the SEC with football, Vanderbilt University is named for Vanderbilt. In today's dollars, as you can see, he'd be worth 185 billion. He'd be almost worth Elon Musk and Bezos put together. And of course, as you can see here, many considered him one of the worst. He was definitely a robber baron. He controlled all these railroads, as you can see here. Okay, so he had quite the control over shipping through trains. Bring that down here to Florida real quick. During the late 1800s, we had our own two who were building their railroads. Vanderbilt was not down here, but those two were Henry Flagler and Henry Plant. Henry Flagler, of course, built on the East Coast from Jacksonville all the way down to the Keys. And on the west side of the state, Tampa area, was Henry Plant. And of course, all along the route here, now notice it wasn't all uh, easy going. There were a lot of disasters, especially with hurricanes hitting. But all along the way, of course, Henry Flagler would build his famous hotels. One of them's in um, Ormond Beach. And in Ormond, of course, it's called the Casements. And that area actually is where Rockefeller lived and came down to this area. And then Flagler also, of course, Flagler College in St. Augustine. Used to be a beautiful hotel. Today it's a beautiful, of course, college. Here we can see what some people thought of the industrialists or the captains of industry or the robber barons. In this case, they'd be robber barons. Notice this is the Senate. If you look carefully up here, the people's interest, it's closed off. The people aren't allowed into the Senate. Whereas the door is wide open for these who control industry. Notice the steel beam, copper. Here you have Standard Oil, so that of course represents Rockefeller. Okay, the steel, of course, would be Carnegie. All right, and they had so much power that, of course, they controlled the senators, and they basically got their way. And if you'll notice, basically, their suits are really money bags, and again, representing their wealth and how much power they had over the Senate. Okay, and of course, you had J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller. They did not get along with Andrew Carnegie, and there was a great rivalry between them. Carnegie, as I said, and you can kind of see the resemblance. I told you earlier, he definitely was the model of when they created the game Monopoly. Carnegie wrote an article called The Gospel of Wealth, which is advice on how the rich should give back to society to help people. In today's money, as you can see, he would be worth about $310 billion. I'm sorry. That's basically how much he donated back, all right, to North America and the United Kingdom. He was from Scotland, so yes, he did do some for Scotland too. We talked about this yesterday. Standard Oil, Rockefeller having those tentacles like an octopus, controlling the government, and notice it's going after the White House next. Here's another picture of Rockefeller. Notice you can see on the collar here, it says Rockefeller. And notice he's over here, you can see Congress, the Capitol with the oil rigs and the smoke going out. And now he's basically playing with the White House and looking at the president basically like a little pet and definitely having control. Notice the trust giant's point of view, looking at the little government. Okay, and Rockefeller did have a mixed review, um, and as you can see, he was worth billions of dollars. This says 340. I've seen it as high as 700 to 800 billion. Again, just a negative view of the monopolies controlling government. Another one that was looked on as a robber baron, of course, was J.P. Morgan, which today would be J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. He is one of the wealthiest men, or was one of the wealthiest men in America. He had great influence. Notice he profited off all kinds of different things. And one of the interesting things about J.P. Morgan is one of his relatives has the last name of Pierpont, is also the one who, and there's in Savannah, you can see exactly where it happened. They've got a big plaque in Savannah, Georgia, and his relative is the one who wrote the song Jingle Bells. Just a little side note there. And of course, in all this, we cannot forget about Henry Ford. Ford revolutionized industry with the assembly line, and of course, with the Model T Ford. Also, in this, we have migration and immigration, and we will look more at the immigration a little later in another presentation. But here you can see the migration moving from the country to the cities to get jobs. And then, of course, the immigration. Migration is within the same country. Immigration is when you're coming from another country. You have what we call push and pull factors. And these, I'm not going to make you write these down. Um, well, let's go ahead and do these four right here. The push factors were the reasons for leaving your country. It was pushing you out. The pull factors are the reasons for coming to the new country. So those things that attracted you to it. Of course, this led to nativism. We've talked about with the rise of things like the KKK and that bigotry of Americans toward immigrants. And then you have the whole thing about Americanization, replacing your home culture with American culture. Usually, a lot of times you'll see by the third generation, a lot of times the home culture is gone. It's been replaced by the American culture, dress, speech, um, your even the food you eat, etc. Okay, yeah, we'll go there. And so these are the push and pull factors that we were just talking about. Here you can see how over time, Native Americans, and throughout really, and this different theories about that. Of course, you got Columbus, who definitely was not the first one to find America. You had, of course, the Vikings. You had the Irish in the 600s, but Columbus is the one who gets the credit. And then you have your settlement, okay, and your different waves here of immigration. I'll move on through here. We talked about the nativism. Again, your push and pull, why you left, what pushed you out, and why you went to a new country, the pull factor. And you can see the numbers. Notice how it just skyrockets. Okay, and then of course right after it falls, and that'd be because of World War One. Okay. Yeah. All right, we talked earlier about the Chinese Exclusion Act, so you don't necessarily have to get this down, but we did talk about earlier how Congress said no more immigration from China, even though the Chinese played, as you can see in these pictures, they played such a huge role in creating the Transcontinental Railroad. Many died helping create that railroad. And here you can see the political cartoons of the Chinese Exclusion Act saying that all these people, communists, socialists, etc., are welcome, but no Chinamen. Okay? The two, if you please get these down real quick, the two main places for immigration in the east was Ellis Island in New York, and of course, those were European immigrants. And on the west coast in San Francisco was Angel Island, and those, of course, were for Asian immigrants. Many of these immigrants, of course, worked on the railroad. All right, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Yeah, but here you can see why there was such a pool. You had the push from. Notice you've got kind of these creepy figures here pushing people out, and all these immigrants coming to America, and Uncle Sam basically welcoming them in. Here you can see the numbers of people who came. Notice how in Austria-Hungary, how between 1881 and 1890, how it just skyrockets. Okay, and you can see uh, here in China how it goes down because of the Exclusion Act. Urban migration, if you would just get down this top sentence, that'd be good. The population shift from the rural, from country to urban cities. We talked about that, and the big reason is because of factories and jobs. So going from the country to the city. Then we have this whole thing about the social Darwinism and the social gospel. I'll get through that real quick. Um, Basically, it is based on Darwinism that says that only the strongest animals survive. Um, Social Darwinists applied Darwin's theory of evolution to humanity. Um, Here we go. This is the part I want you to write down. The social Darwinists believe that the nature should be allowed to take its course, and the fit, the rich, will survive, the unfit, the poor, will die off. And that was your social Darwinism. And you can see this picture here that the fittest will survive. And that was the case for businesses too. Rockefeller, and then they would just gobble up the smaller companies. Vanderbilt, same thing. And so please, in your notes, get down this last sentence here. The survival of the fittest. Only the rich, the fit will survive, the poor will die off. Same thing with the companies. The strong, rich companies basically gobble up the smaller, poor companies. Some would make those arguments even in today's time. And you probably have seen some examples of like, some say that the reason why Toys R Us went out of business was because of Amazon. You maybe make arguments there, but you can hopefully see a similarity there. So please get just this first sentence down. So social Darwinism is the controversial theory arguing that survival of the fittest applied to humankind, since certain groups were more successful or better at adapting than others, especially when we're talking about businesses, the bigger companies gobbling up the smaller ones. Okay, and of course, it did feed into the whole tension with races and ethnicities, and it did lead to nativists uh, who often look down, as you can see, especially on the Irish, Italians, and Chinese. I'm not going to get into this too much. Moving on. And we get to the social gospel. Please get this down. So you had social Darwinism, then you also had social gospel. Social gospel said it was the Christian approach to solving problems of the Gilded Age. Remember, we said Mark Twain said the Gilded Age had gold on the outside, but on the inside it was rotten. Okay? Um, Basically, the social gospelists were concerned with topics. So please get this down with the 5 bullets. Social gospelists were concerned with economic inequality, poverty, crime, alcoholism, which, as you see in the parentheses, leads to the temperance movement, which we'll get to later, where the 18th Amendment will be passed that outlaws alcohol. It led to racial tensions. We talked about social Darwinism, how because of that, different races looked down on others, and it led to those tensions. And of course, child labor. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday. So please get down this part here, and then the 5 bullets. And a part of the social gospel, 2 big names. One is D.L. Moody, and please just get down the first and last bullet here. Some consider him the greatest evangelist of the 19th century. And of course, he is associated with the social gospel movement. Notice in the middle there, you don't have to write it down, but he was personal friends with Lincoln and Grant. Um, and as you can see, he would pack stadiums uh, when he would do his sermons. He also, and it still is in existence, the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, still a pretty large institution, and he definitely had a big impact. Now, keep that in mind. He's in Chicago, okay? And as you see, he started Sunday schools for thousands of homeless families. And he's going to have also an impact on another person from Chicago, the second person that is associated with social Darwin, the social gospel, and that is Billy Sunday. And I'm going to talk a little more about Billy Sunday later when we get into the 1910s. But Billy Sunday in the late 1800s was one of the best baseball players around. And he goes from being one of America's most recognized baseball players to, uh, as you can see, one of the biggest evangelists in U.S. history. Uh, his sermons reach hundreds of thousands, if not some say millions. And he brought, as it says here, that energy and charisma. He took that athleticism, that baseball part in him, and he would. And we'll look at some videos of him later. But he's definitely involved with the whole thing about social gospel, giving back to the American people, to society, and try to help with these things like with racism, social injustice, etc. So, those are your notes. Here's now what you're going to do. Draw a line wherever you are in your notes, and you're going to answer these 3 questions. What are 3 things you learned? What are 2 things that surprised you? What's one question you still have? And when you're done, I want you to please take a picture, upload, or probably pictures, upload your notes and your answers to these questions to Canvas. If you have questions on this, please be sure to let me know.